first of all, I would like to welcome our dear guest, the hot gay guy, Édouard Louis, and welcome to all of you who came to listen to our conversation today. If I had to put Édouard's writing in fewer sentences so we can spare some time, he's author of 3 really successful and great books, and one of those was translated to Croatian these days, I don't know, a few days ago, 2 days ago. On finira avec Eddie, završimo sa Edijem, raskrstimo s Edijem, I'm starting to speak in Croatian, it's really weird. He is, they call him the enfant terrible of French scene, but I don't think you're that terrible. You look nice. Although if you read what he writes, it's really sharp as a knife. And if you like boring, predictable authors, then he's not for you. So I would say, that's it. I have someone else. So I have several questions. We don't have much time, so if you don't feel comfortable answering something, just look away. I'll get it. So you legally changed your name. And I thought about it, and it sounds to me like you change your name, and then Eddie stays sort of a character, so you distance yourself from the younger days. And is that then, are you writing about a completely different person? Was that necessary? And if you were to change your name legally, would Eddie ever be a writer, coming from a working class milieu and things like that? Do you find that it was necessary for you as a writer to change your name legally and to start writing under a different name?
Thank you for your beautiful introduction. I'm very honored to be in conversation with you today. I would say that no, certainly Eddie, the child I used to be, was not predestined to be a writer. It was quite the contrary. I became a writer by accident. I became a writer against myself. I came into literature against myself. What I describe in the end of Eddie is that, I grew up in this working class, very poor milieu in the north of France, in a very small village, far from any city, far from anything basically. And in this milieu, the masculine values were the most important values. It was even like an obsession with masculinity, days after days, always, all the time, in every single sentence. And I was born a gay kid in this village, and I couldn't fit in. And so during my whole childhood, I was struggling as much as I could in order to fit in order to be a masculine guy, in order to fulfill the expectations of my parents, of the village, of my whole milieu, and I failed. And it's because I failed that I escaped, but I escaped because I had no choice but to escape. Because as soon as I was talking, my father was ashamed, my mother was ashamed, because they thought that I was feminine, they thought that I was not tough enough, they thought that I was not masculine enough, and I tried, and I tried, and I tried, and I was so bad. I was a loser, and because I was a loser, I had no choice but to escape. But for me, it was the most painful thing at that time. I didn't want to escape. I didn't want to be different. People were telling me, you are different, you are different, you are gay, you will never be like us. And my biggest dream was to be like them. I wanted to be good at soccer, I wanted to be the most straight boy, I wanted to be the most masculine boy, and then I escaped, and I had to reinvent myself, and so through many things that I couldn't tell today because it would take too much time, I ended up becoming a writer. And as soon as I became a writer, Eddie was not only a name, but for me, Eddie was the name of a past that I hated, was a past of a childhood that I detested, precisely because I couldn't fit in, because I had no friends, because I had difficult communication with my family. And so as soon as someone would tell me Eddie, it was like someone was calling me faggot. It was someone insulting me. It was someone telling me you are poor, you know. And I couldn't bear this name. I couldn't bear this name anymore. And for me to change my name was to change my life, was to change the story of my life. And when I remember when I went to court, I didn't want that name to be only a writer name, because I didn't want to steal a paper from institution, from the state, saying Eddie, saying you are Eddie. I wanted to change it legally. And in France, I don't know about Croatia, but actually in France it's a very difficult process.
It's the same thing.
It's not easy to change your name.
Easier.
And so I had to go to court, I had to take a lawyer, it took months and hundreds of euros to do it. But as soon as I did it, you know, it was so beautiful, because every time someone would call me Édouard, I was thinking, this is not only a name, this is the name of my reinvention, this is the name of my freedom. This name is the proof that I reinvented myself. So every time someone was telling me Édouard, this person was telling me, you are free, you know. And of course, this freedom was more or less an illusion, because we are always less free than we expect and that we wish. But still, Eddie meant faggot, and Édouard meant you can become something else. And that's why I had no choice but to change, because I was that loser who didn't succeed with Eddie. I didn't succeed to be Eddie, in fact.
You tried. You gave back. Another question I wanted to ask in the same, I mean, it's not the same question, but a little bit different. But what did you find more difficult? To reinvent yourself outside of literature, or to reinvent the French literature you're now part of? Because I went in a little slump and couldn't read like French authors for like the past 3 years, unless it's Marquise de Sade. I adore him. But I couldn't read it, and then I don't know how I came and I got your books, Histoire de Violence, and it left me speechless, if I'm being honest. It really, I said, this is not a French author. It didn't sound French. There are no long convoluted sentences. There is no, you know, you were really brutally honest, and it hits a reader really hard. And so I said, oh, if you read these sentences and the way this kid writes, I mean, you're 10 years younger than I said, this is brilliant. I mean, you can tell you're not bourgeoisie, you're not the French we know, and we sometimes hate, if I'm being totally honest. So I was wondering, you know, this reinvention of French literature with your 3 of your books, was it kind of, did you want to make bourgeoisie uncomfortable with it? What was your intention behind it? All the style and your characters, and you know, I mean, with all of 3 books, but especially the first one, because we have the Croatian translation, so people will certainly read it.
Yes, you know, I remember that when my friend Didier Ribon published Returning to Reims, Pauvre attaque à Reims, I don't know how to say it in Croatian. I was reading it, and there were many people reading it, and very often people would say, oh, this book is so strong, and it's describing the working class 40 years ago. Fortunately, it changed. The situation is not the same anymore. There is no such poverty anymore. And people would say that again and again and again, even if he was making the opposite statement. There was this kind of ideology of not seeing what Didier was presenting, and I grew up in the 90s, in the early 2000s, in the north of France, and you know, like more generally, as soon as I arrived in Paris, I started to read books like you. I started to discover French literature, and I would see nowhere the world of my childhood, the class of my childhood, the milieu of my childhood, as if it was the very condition, the very definition of literature to exclude this kind of people, to exclude this kind of life. You do good literature if you don't talk about my mother. You do good literature if you don't talk about my father, you know? And literature has always worked this way, you know? For so many times, if you're a writer in the United States, to write a novel was writing about white people against black people. And if you were doing that, you could find a publishing house. You had reviews in the papers. You were considered an important and a serious writer, you know. And even aesthetically, you know, like writing about black people was considered inferior on an aesthetic level. That's the same thing with sexual minorities. For so long in France and in so many other countries in the world, to write about LGBT people was considered pornographic, was considered like not serious literature. So not only on a political and social level, but also on a literary level. So, you know, when I think when we write literature, we should always ask ourselves, what is excluded from literature? What is absent from literature? And I think that every good literature should start as an act of aggression, as an assault against literature. You know, when I was writing The End of Eddie, I was thinking, I hate these people. I hate the writers the contemporary writers in France, what I see in the bookshops, the kind of things that they are talking about, like, except a few exceptions like Didier Eribon or Annie Ernaux or Patrick Chanot, like a very, very small group of people doing different stuff, but 95% of I was thinking like, why do they do it? Why don't they talk about more vital issues, more important issues? And I really believe we should, if you love literature too much, you will do bad literature. You have to challenge it and to say like, who is not here? Who is not represented? Not represented doesn't mean that we don't talk about them. It's not true that there are no books about poor people. There are so many books about poor people. Maybe more than about, no, I don't think so. There are a lot of books about poor people. There are a lot of movies about poor people. But most of the time they are so misrepresented that it's another way of not talking about them, you know. Sometimes the more you talk about someone and the more you make this person invisible. If you look at the political field, for example, in France, in Croatia, in the United States, there is a kind of obsession in the political field for poor people. They talk about poor people all the time.
But like, it's only for poor people. Poor people should watch it.
Exactly, like it's for poor, or either it's for poor people, so the particular program for them, or the other option is to say like poor people are getting money from the state and they don't work enough. Poor people are lazy. Poor people should work harder. If poor people don't want to be poor anymore, they have to study harder at school. And it's what is going on with people like Macron today in France. There is a kind of obsession for the working class. They talk about poor people all the time. But these discourses about the working class are making them invisible. And the more they talk about them, the more they make them invisible. So when I started to write and when I wrote The End of Eddie and I wrote about the milieu of my childhood, I did it because some people were ignoring them, but also because some people were talking about them again and again. But what I was reading was so wrong and so the opposite of truth that that's how I started.
How did you go along with French media? Because I know you got a lot of hate, people calling you a liar sometimes. I also watched an interview you gave to two journalists. I maybe uploaded 2 months ago on YouTube, the French Radio Europe one, and you said, yeah, Macron hates poor people. And the guy who was sitting opposite you, the journalist who I kind of think should side with a writer and not with the president, Macron, he said like, oh, those are tough words. And I was, does that happen a lot to you, that you kind of a spokesperson for working class people, for poor people, and then you go and speak to people who should understand those struggles, and they kind of don't get it at all. So what was your experience, especially with press and media in France?
It was difficult. There were some people who supported me because also the mediatic field is plural. There are some very good left-wing media in France, like Paris News, like Diacritique. There are some left-wing media and some different people within the mainstream media. But also there were, yes, indeed, a lot of insults, a lot of attacks, a lot of extremely violent pieces. Some journalists basically calling me a faggot, calling me a liar, calling me a lot of names. But also I really believe that it's a good sign. You know, the more you are insulted and the more you are making people uncomfortable. And I think it's completely linked to your previous question, because, you know, particularly in France, which is the situation that I know the best, you had at some point writers like Marguerite Duras, Simone de Beauvoir, Violette Leduc, Jean Genet, and these people were really confronting and challenging the society we live in. And then there was a kind of counter-revolution against these kind of writers. And there was suddenly in France, a new ideology of what literature should be. And this idea that the less social, the less real you are, and the more pure you are, literary speaking, you know. And so there was a counter movement after the death of these people. And when I started to write, this was the state of French literature. Because the less you are committed, the less you talk about reality, the less you talk about violence, and the more literary you are. And so I had to write against that. And suddenly some people were telling me, are you okay? Because so many people attack you, so many people insult you. And I was telling them, but that's the opposite you should question. You should go and see some writers and tell them, why are you not insulted? You know, what is the problem with you? Why nobody is insulting you? You know, it's an issue, and they shouldn't ask me the question. It should be natural for a writer to be insulted. You know, and I would be so ashamed of not being insulted. And so, of course, sometimes it's difficult. It's difficult on a personal level because you have to come with it. You know, you wake up and you open the paper and it's full of insults against you. But after it goes away and your book stays, you know, a journalist writes something that stays for one day and your book can eventually stay forever. So just don't be afraid.
I said online on Twitter that you're savage, and you really are. And the interesting thing is, in your last book, Who Killed My Father, which is also really great, and I hope we get to read it in Croatian as soon as possible, because I think it's brilliant. You actually gave place to a French politician. You made them villains in your story. You kind of made them the antagonists of your story. You had your father figure, you had this working class, and then you have these names. Do you think naming names helps, you know, putting them on their rightful place as a bad guys in literature, and you think that will hold like for the next generations?
Mm-hmm. Yes, to complete my last answer also, what I have to say that for me to write the stories I write about working class, about poor people, meant to fight against the conservative and the people in power, but meant also to fight a certain part of the left, you know, because in my books I'm talking about the poor milieu we talked about, but I also talk about homosexuality and homophobia. I talk about my mother. You know, my mother during her whole life, she wanted to work, and my father didn't want her to work because he would say that a woman's place is at home, and she desperately wanted to work, and he would tell her, no, you stay at home. She desperately wanted to wear makeup, and my father was telling her, makeup is for sluts, you shouldn't wear makeup, and it was her dream just to put makeup. And the first thing she did when she left my father, after 20 years with him, she wanted to break up with him earlier, but she didn't have money, she didn't have any way to hide, any way to escape, any way to leave him, she didn't have money, she had kids, so she had to stay. She was forced 20 years of her life, between 25 and 45 years old, you know. She was with this man, not being able to work, not being able to wear makeup. And in my books I talk about that, and in talking about that I had to confront also a certain part of the left who was telling me, oh, you are talking badly about the working class, about poor people, because you say there is homophobia, you say there is a masculine domination, and it was probably the most violent attack, the thing that surprised me the most, to be attacked by my own side. And what I was saying is that, you know, I'm not talking badly about working class people. I'm trying to include more bodies, more existence, more people in what we call working class, which means also the women, also the LGBT people who are not treated well in the working class and in other milieu too, probably. But in the milieu of my childhood, I know about it and I know it well. So I had to fight against this ideology, and as I often say, there is very often when people talk about working class, there is two alternatives, which are either the savages, so they are violent, they are racist, they are dangerous, stinky, awful, and everything, or the good savages. They are authentic, they are good people, they are not like, contrary to the bourgeoisie, they are not pretending to be something, they are honest with each other. And some things that you can find in the literature of Pasolini, even in the literature of Jean Genet, in a huge part of the literature, even the best literature. And so I wanted to fight both of these complicit adversaries, like these two ideologies who pretend to fight each other, but in fact they support each other. So it meant to fight against a certain left, to say, no, working class are good people, it's not like the... And also, as you were mentioning, the people, the conservative people, and the people on the right. And what I did in the last book in My Father, which is about my father that I talk about also in the end of Eddie, was that I wrote the story of the life of my father and the body of my father, and I included in this story the history of French politics of the last 30 years. So all the decisions from people like Jacques Chirac, like Emmanuel Macron, like Nicolas Sarkozy, that affected the body of my father. Because when I remember when I was a child, as soon as a political decision was made by a government, it would change our lives radically, When they were cutting welfare, suddenly we couldn't eat anymore. Very often at the end of the month, my mother would say, we don't have food for tonight, we don't eat, we have nothing to eat, and I was 10 years old, and she would tell me, can you go and see the neighbors and knock the door to get food? Because you are a child, she will have pity, and she will say yes, and if I go, she won't say yes. And so, if you are cutting 5 euros of welfare for the poorest people, like Macron did, for example, 6 months ago, he was cutting 5 euros for the poorest people in France, it means that this moment, when the working class people are saying, I don't have food for tonight, it will start 2 days earlier. 2 days earlier, you will say to your 10 years old kid, I don't have food for tonight. You are 10 years old, and you are not going to eat tonight. And like these memories of politics for me was so strong. My father, when he was 35 maybe, there was a welfare program to help poor people to go to the dentist. And my father went to the dentist, and it was the first time of his life. And before that, his teeth were painful. So for him, a government and a political decision meant, am I going to eat? Am I going to have a problem with my teeth? Am I going to be able to feed myself? And as I always say, if you think about the migrants, it's even more relevant, If Macron says, I don't welcome migrants, then it means that the migrants, like France, who is a rich country who could welcome migrants, it means that these people will die in the Mediterranean Sea. So if the man you love, if the woman you love, if your brother, if your sister, if your mother die in the Mediterranean Sea, it's part of your intimate history, It's part of yourself, it's part of your body. And so what I try to show in Hook in My Father is that for dominated people, for excluded people, for poor people, there is no difference between political history and intimate history. And for my father, a decision by Sarkozy is the same thing that the first day he met my mother, or the first time he had sex with a woman, or his relationship with his son. It's part of his flesh, it's part of his body, it's part of his history. And for me, it was not an easy thing to do, to name these people in a book, because I felt that they didn't deserve to be in a book. But I thought I have to be honest, and I have to fight against my own urge to not put them in a book, because this is the truth. This is the truth. I don't know who else in France could say we will welcome 1 million migrants. Only Macron can do it. Angela Merkel did it in Germany. She probably lost the position. I don't say that it's easy. I don't say that it's an easy thing to do. But he's probably the only person who can say that, and it's all his ministers will follow him. And so when these people don't do it, they have blood on their hands. They are actually killing people, and they are they become part of a physical and of an intimate history. So that's what I try to. So it was a long answer, but
no, I mean, you didn't say anything stupid. It's
cool.
really,
It happens to me sometimes.
it happens to me a lot, but you're really good. And I mean, you were saying you had to fend off and fight for the working class against part of the left, and I completely understand that position. I said, like, good, the bad, and the working class, where does it fit? And I wanted to ask you, why do you think, why do we need people to be able to be bad, and also to stand beside them, even with, they don't have to be perfect or good. We need bad in people, so we can distinguish the good. And also the fact that sometimes people are a contradiction by itself. I mean, I cannot say for myself that I'm always good. I don't think you can either. So the idea that we always have to be good every second of our lives is kind of depressing, isn't it? And also the fact that if you want your characters to have to be like interesting to read on paper, they cannot be like boringly one-sided. Yeah. So what do you think we can, like the rest of the authors, also do? How do you fight against this good and the bad, good versus bad, the archetypes and the boring literature that comes out of it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the question for me when I write, I ask myself, is it true what I'm saying? I'm not thinking like, am I good with people? I am bad with people. And I agree completely with you. We should ask the question to ourselves. Like some people, when I published the end of it, some people were asking me, don't you think you give a negative image of the north of France? And as a friend of mine would say, I don't write a touristic guide. I'm not here to promote the north of France to you. I'm not here to be kind with people. It's not. I'm not a priest. I'm not kind with people. It's a bad example, but I don't know. I'm trying to talk about reality. I'm talking what is going on, and I'm talking in the end of it. Like when I talk about the fact that when I was a child, my father would say every day, he would say, we have to kill Arabs, we have to send them to concentration camps with gay people, we have to hang gay people, we have to take a stick and put it in the house of gay people to kill them. He would say these kind of sentences every day. And one day there was a party in the village, and there was a gay guy, and a group of teenagers from the village started to insult the gay guy. And my father went, and he stood up, and he told them, if you touch this guy, I will destroy all of you, You let him do, you let him be. If he wants to be gay, let him be gay, And all this complexity, it's just the truth, is what I'm trying to articulate in my book. Also, my father would, as I was mentioning, my father would say extremely violent things against Arabs. He was, of course, voting for the far right, for the National Front. And one day, when I was maybe 11 or 12, my mother told me, your father, when he was a teenager, his best friend was an Arab guy. They were not only friends, they were traveling together in the south of France, they were living together in the south of France, they were sleeping in the same bed in the south of France. My mother would say, I don't know what they were doing in this bed. And
they had a great time.
I hope for them. But I remember I was 11, I was 10, I was 12, I don't remember, but when my mother said that to me, I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what she just told me. And probably my father was someone with different possibilities of being within his own body, But because we were living in this context of far right, of populism, of violence against minorities, gay people, like he couldn't explore the other possibility of his being, And I really believe that if France was different at that time, my father would have been able to explore one of the other possibilities of his being, of what he was, of what he, and so this is really, there is a kind of strangely a meritocratic ideology, not only on the right but also on the left, which is, as you were talking about, people think, okay, if you fight about the working class, you have to show that they are good, you have to show that they are nice people, that they are not worse than the bourgeoisie, that they are indeed maybe better. And for me, this is a very reactionary view. My point is, I try to get a more radical point and to say, I fight for people even if they are monsters, you know. Even if they are monsters, this is a Marxist statement, I am fighting against objective conditions. I am fighting against objective violence, and I don't care if people deserve to be protected or not. And in the book I also talk about my brother. He's an awful person. I think he's like, no one is like him in my family. He's like beating his wife, he's really like extremely violent, extremely homophobic. He's an awful person. I don't talk with him at all. Last time I spoke to him was 9 years ago. I don't want to see him, I don't want to talk to him. But at the same time, I want to fight for him because he's starving, because he's not eating every day, you know, because he's an alcoholic. He drinks so much that every morning he wakes up at 8 a.m. and he's already drunk because he never gets rid of the alcohol. He's completely desperate, he's crazy in his mind. And because of his social condition, and I want to fight against that, doesn't mean that I have to love him. I don't know if I love my father. I don't know. But I write a book about him because his life is unbearable. And for me, this is a much more radical point to make. All the people who are in jail, when Michel Foucault or Jean Genet or Angela Davis are fighting for the prisoners, probably among the prisoners there are some very awful people who did awful things, who maybe killed their wife, you know. But this is two struggles, you know, fighting against masculine domination that allows some men to kill some women, as it happens a lot, and at the same time fighting against prison and prison as such, the idea of prison. So it's very bizarre because when I talk about it, I have the impression that it's obvious, you know, it should be obvious, but in fact it's not at all.
I think most people don't understand how you can make a difference between an individual case and the fact you were saying something objectively truthful. I mean, people are suffering, and also poverty changes people, changes your character, your physique. As you said, your father is like deteriorating his health, he's physically suffering because of the conditions he's living in, and the job he was doing for all those years. And I think I wanted to ask you now, maybe we steer it in another direction, but we'll come back to that, is the fact that you're writing about your dad. And I was it was really interesting to me, because that's what actually straight men usually do. Really, I mean, if you say to me, oh, one of my, dear, gay writers, they all write about, their mothers. And the mother figure is always, the most important one. And you wrote about your dad, twice, in the first book, and then Who Killed My Father. And I was like, this has to do something with the reactions you're getting, because people are not used to read queer literature or gay author talking about his dad in this way, you know. And do you think it kind of changed the way the French public and the rest of the world perceived your book? Do you ever think about it? Would it be different if you were to write about your mother and not about the father figure? Because we're talking about toxic masculinity, but guys like to read about other guys. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm. It's a very complicated question. I mean, I wrote about my father because my father today is completely destroyed, and I thought that it was he's only 50 years old and he has trouble walking, he has trouble breathing, he's at the hospital all the time, and he's only 52, 53 maybe now. and he doesn't have a big disease. The state of his body is just due to his social condition, to the fact that he was a factory worker. As I said at the end of Eddie, he had an accident at the factory when he was 35 years old. It destroyed his back completely. He was unable to walk for several years, and at some point he was forced by the French administration to go back to work in spite of his health. So they were telling him, you go back to work, you go back, oh, you will lose your welfare. And so my father, since he didn't go to school, he had no choice but becoming either a cashier or a street sweeper. And he became a street sweeper, so bending over all day long, in spite of his back, in spite of his body, and now he's destroyed. So probably it also comes from this sense of emergency, because paradoxically, my mother was stronger. She escaped. She suffered a lot before that, but she managed to escape. She has a better life than him now. And so that was one of the reasons why I started to really write about him. But also, I don't know, maybe also it's...
And also your dad, the character of dad, of the father in the book, is shown to be like more emotionally expressive. He's aggressive, but also there's underlying emotion inside. And the mother, I find her to be a bit cold and distant. And so you have this, when you write about dad, you have this moment when he thinks he's dying and he's giving you like his wedding ring. And then you have the next chapter goes to your mother, and the mother is contextualized differently by the 18th century, by something that's more political than intimate. And I thought that was really subversive. The fact that you're talking about your dad as an emotional being, and then talking about mom, a bit distant and a bit different. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, I know that psychoanalysis is not that huge anymore, but if this book were published like 20 years ago, they will be all over you, like I mean, you and every book you ever write. You know, and the fact that you have these scenes where mom is like cleaning the fish while you're trying to do your homework, and then you hate the fish. You know, there are certain things like really Freudian, and they sound interesting to me. And that's why I wanted to ask you, why the father figure, why the emotions of father feels, why his body, why that, you know, issues, and a kind of distant but also loving portrayal of your mother, but in a different way than you did with the father.
Because indeed, what I realized writing my books is that the norms are less effective than I thought when I was a child, or at least that the way the norms function and the norms of gender is much more complex than I expected. Because during my childhood, my father would say, a man should never cry, boys don't cry, boys never cry. And he was crying 2 times a week. And my mother cried 2 times in my childhood.
So really?
He was crying all the time, for everything. My mother was making fun of him, like always crying. And I remember when the Twin Tower collapsed, and I'm sorry to say that, but my father was crazy about the United States because they made war in Arabic countries. And my father loved them because of that. And for them, George W. Bush was a hero because he was killing Arabs. And so when the Twin Tower collapsed, my father cried because it was happening in the United States. And he was telling, and I was 9 years old when the Twin Towers collapsed. And my father told me, now they are going to come to France and we will all die. And I was a child, so I started to cry, and my father was crying too. And I remember my mother entered the room and said, "Oh no, all the men crying again," you know. And she thought that my father was completely insane with his theory of like what was going on in this small village in the north of France, as if like Afghanistan was going to attack this 900 people village in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by cows and trees, and it was the kind of like insanity, but what I realize now, that of course like my father was deeply affected by masculinity, and as I say in the book, he excluded himself very young from the school system because he thought that it was something masculine. It was a performance of his masculinity to stop school very young, because only women and faggots would be submitted to the school system, to what teachers were asking. So in order to prove, to show his masculinity to other people, he had to leave the system, the school system, very, very young, and he didn't have any degree, didn't have any diplomas, and he had very odd jobs during his life. And so it was affected by masculinity, but not completely, and at least it was much more complex. So now when I write about the milieu of my childhood, the question I ask myself is, why this strange paradox? Why the norms, gender norms, sexual norms, social norms, are still being reproduced again and again, even if people never completely succeed to fulfill the norms, you know? But as if there is no connection between norms and bodies. Even if no one respects the norms, they are still being reproduced, you know? Again and again. And the fact that we don't succeed in reproducing the norm is not affecting the norm. The norm stays as strong as it is. And it works like this. I don't know, have you seen this TV series, Downton Abbey? It's about the English aristocracy, you know? And in this English British aristocracy, you have like, it's the opposite of my childhood, so it's an aristocracy, they are very rich, and it's a world with a lot of norms, you know? So if you're a woman, you have to marry with someone like eventually richer that will bring money, even more money to the family. You should dress a certain way, and no one respects the norm, you know? One of the girls becomes a socialist, the other one has sex with a Turkish guy who is just coming from one day. The other woman has sex and have a child outside of marriage, and no one is respecting the rule, and the rule is being reproduced again and again, you know. And so, and it's in a certain way, it was the same thing happening. And the paradox is at the, as you were mentioning about these two chapters, this paradox is at the core of my books. And so maybe my political response to that is also inspired by Didier, by Annie, by many people, is to talk about shame. Maybe if someone were going to see my father and telling him, well, I know it's not as simple as that, of course I'm naive, but if someone came to my father and told him, you know, I'm a man and I cry too all the time, you know, maybe my father wouldn't believe that he was alone because he wasn't reproducing the norm, and because he wasn't reproducing the norm, he was ashamed of it. And so maybe sometimes the number one, the biggest effect of norm is shame, and shame means silence, and silence means no one is challenging the norm, so it can continue because we are all here in our little corner. We are all losers, you know, all losing in front of the norms. All of us are failing to reproduce the norm, but we are ashamed of it, and so we don't change it. And so when you come out and you say, I am a man and I cry too, I am a woman and I don't want to have kids, I don't want to fulfill a certain role of what it is to be a woman. If you say, and you, in talking about shame, I think that talking about shame could maybe be the strongest tool against the social norm, because then everyone realizes he's a loser, you know. When the books that helped me when I started to read were the ones that made me understand that I was not alone, that I was not the only guy who lost again and who was failing again and again. And I thought, like, maybe it's normal. I guess it's the same for you as a writer. When I read an interview of a writer like Toni Morrison or Svetlana Alexievich, and I see that it's so difficult for her to write a novel, and for me, like, they're this absolute genius. And when I read that it's difficult for them, I think, so it's normal. It's normal if I don't succeed. It's normal if it's difficult. It's normal if I'm not a winner, you know. And so that's why I write a lot about shame also.
We don't have much time, but I think we have like 5 minutes, maybe. Okay, I have 2 questions, and you choose which one you want to answer. I'll go with the both. So I was wondering, do you think, like, I mean, French literature has a tradition of autobiographical works, autofiction, autobiography, memoirs, and things like that. And you think, how is it to write a book like that, autobiographical or autofiction, doesn't matter, in a time of social media, where you were like, does it change? And the other thing I wanted to ask, because I was talking on Instagram, as I told you, and I saw that you have a lot of hashtag amitié, hashtag friendship, like a way of life and things like that. And I was wondering what the difference is for you between the family and friendship, and how do they interact when you write? Do you think you write differently when you have to write about your family, someone you didn't choose and you were brought up that way, and when you have your friends whom you choose and they are also becoming kind of your family, but extended family, something different? So I mean, you say whatever, we have 5 minutes. You can say you love us all or whatever.
I mean, the difference is that my family destroyed me and my friends saved me. So that's an absolute difference between family and friends. I had no choice but to build a group of people that would help me and welcome me and make me feel part of something bigger. And also when you try to write different things, radical things, it's too hard if you are isolated. At least I am not strong enough. I'm just a skinny gay guy, and I can't stand alone. It would be too difficult. And the fact that I am surrounded by friends artists that I admire, writers that I admire, movie makers that I admire, makes me feel so much stronger. And there is this scene that I love to talk about. It was a few years ago. I was in Montreal, in Canada, with the Canadian movie maker Xavier Dolan, and I had just published my first novel, Eddie, at that time. And as you were saying, so many people were attacking me. Not all of them, but a lot. And Xavier told me, "Are you okay with all these attacks? How do you feel?" And I told him, "Oh, it's okay. I don't care." And but in fact, it was not completely true because it affected me at some point. Now I'm okay, but when it was happening, it was very difficult. And Xavier Dolan told me, because for me, when they attacked me for my first movie, it destroyed me. It was so violent. And in fact, it was what I felt at the beginning. And I thought that Xavier was much braver than me in saying it out loud. And I understood that it was also the role of groups and of friendship to be able to address these kind of issues. And if I look at the history of French literature, for me the strongest moments were collective moments. It was the moment of Genet, Beauvoir, Fanon, Sartre. It was the moment of the nouveau roman, Duras, Simon, Beckett, and these people, they were not necessarily all together all the time, but they were admiring each other. Sometimes they would see each other, some of them would see each other, and it made them strong. And that's really what we are trying to rebuild today with some people like Ocean Wong, like Sophie Kahl, like Thomas Ostermeyer, like Didier Ribon. Like we are a group of friends, and we see each other very often. We talk together very often. And for me, this is a condition this is the condition of a radical creation. So some people manage to do it without it, like Thomas Bernhardt living alone in his house in the countryside in Austria, but he was too crazy.
He wasn't alone. He had an older woman caring about him.
So yes, I don't know anything about the
do we have time for a few questions from the audience, or is it 2 minutes or 2 questions?
Two questions.
Okay. Okay. Who has the smartest question? Okay. I'm sorry, but the guy with the glasses looks kind of smart. So yes.
Should I take the microphone or speak like this?
I hear you. If others hear you.
first, thank you for being here. I wanted to thank you for saying everything you said and for using the opportunity of writing your books, for defending the poor people and seeing the truth, speaking the truth, saying that the political decisions can harm people and kill people. So just for that, I wanted to thank you. That's first, and then my question has no link with that. I wanted to use the opportunity that we are in a movie theater to make a parallel maybe between your books and movies. And I wanted to ask you, because when I was reading your books, I had a lot of pictures from Bruno Dumont's movies in my can, and I wanted to ask you whether he was an influence for you or it was just totally different.
I discovered Bruno Dumont's film quite late. I think I was finishing History of Violence when I discovered his movies. But in fact, first I was more influenced by in cinema by people like the Dardenne brothers, who were really important to me and were a kind of safe space where I felt finally represented, you know. And also because now we are all talking about it, but the way the Dardenne brothers were talking about women in the working class, immigrants in the working class, prostitutes in the working class, and all these things that now we call intersectionality. The Dardenne brothers, they started it 40 years ago, so I think we should pay tribute to them because they were really always trying to articulate these different identities and these different, so they were extremely important for me. And also after Bruno Dumont, in fact, one of my projects that I failed, so I didn't do it, was a book inspired by La Vie de Jésus, the life of Jesus, by Bruno Dumont, because I was obsessed with this movie. I was watching it 2 times a week for 1 year. I am an obsessed person, so as soon as I like something, I watch it again and again and again and again. And I same thing for books, same thing for food. When I like something, I want to have it every day. and so yes, he had a major influence on me, and the way he was talking about these working class guys being bored all day long, you know, at the bus stop or on the steps of the church of the village, waiting for the time to pass, waiting for the day to be over. It was something so strong because it was the story of my childhood. I would arrive at the bus stop at 8 p.m. and I would stay till 2 or 3 a.m. and we just had like plastic glasses and we were drinking cheap whiskey. And I had the impression that nothing was more, it was so well represented by Bruno Dumont. And probably it inspired a small part of Who Killed My Father, my last book, in which I talk about the fact, I talk about my father, and I say that my father tried to be young when he was 18, 17, because being a working class man, he had the impression that he had to go from childhood to work and to adulthood. And he understood that what we call youth was something for the bourgeoisie and not for him, because his father was working at the factory at 14 years old, right after school, and his grandfather, and he wanted his youth, you know, he wanted the right to be young. So when he was 17 or 18, he did everything in order to be young. He tried to escape, he tried to go in the south of France, he was sleeping outside, he was sleeping in the field, and for me it was a desperate attempt to be young, because the distinction is between the people to whom youth is given and the people to whom youth is taken. And I think that someone like my father was so hungry to not have access to his youth. And I wouldn't have seen it so well without Bruno Dumont's movies, and they kind of, yes, urge of being young, because you feel that it's unfair that you don't have access to that. So if you didn't see La Vie de Jésus, it doesn't talk about Jesus at all. It's about a working.
Well, people love Jesus here, don't worry. Okay, we need a hot person. We had a smart one, and now you choose whom you want to answer. Who has questions?
But maybe we can take 2 at the same time, and I will do a mix answer.
Thank you very much. I would like to know what's your attitude, your relationship with the so-called les bobos, la bourgeoisie bohème, the French elitist cultural circle. Are you part of it? Is there a danger that you want, if you're not, that you will become a part of it? Since you were really talking about your social background, and this is bourgeoisie, but cultural bourgeoisie, are you part of it? And is there, so what's your attitude towards them?
And maybe we take the question of the same.
Yes, my question was about your support to Assa, and why do you...
Assa Traoré?
Yeah. Why you choose to support her particularly?
Yes, you know, regarding what you were saying, I'm safe because they don't want me. They don't want me. Like, a huge part of the bourgeoisie don't want me. And of course, for me at some point, it was my dream to be part of the bourgeoisie. It was so hard to escape the milieu of my childhood. It was so hard to escape my childhood. When I arrived in Paris, I wanted to be part of this milieu. I wanted to be part. I was in conversation with Bill T. Jones a few days ago, the American black choreographer, and he told me when I arrived in New York, when I wanted to be part of the white middle class. You know, I wanted to go to the parties. I wanted to have dinners in fancy restaurants like them, because I had this impression that I was being kept away from this life, and it created in my body a hunger and a very strong desire to be part of that life. And that's the same thing for me. I wanted to be like the bourgeoisie. I wanted to have their face. I wanted to go to the opera like them and to sit like a bourgeois guy like them and to be so happy to be part of this milieu. And how couldn't you think this kind of thing when you see so many privileges that you didn't have access to, when you see so many things that no one had in your family, in your milieu. But fortunately for me, I felt that I was not completely welcome because of everything that I had to say, everything that I wanted to say about violence, about poverty, about their responsibility, about the responsibility of the dominant class in the process of violence. And they pushed me away. I felt a little bit excluded by this milieu, and it saved me, you know. And the bourgeoisie don't understand that they create weapons against themselves. At some point, they could have assimilated me because of my personal trajectory, my personal background. But fortunately, they didn't. And because of that. Day after day, I hate them. You know, the French cultural bourgeoisie, conservative, homophobic, racist. Of course, once again, it's complex. It's complex. There are some people who, like me, impose themselves. You know, and also I think that we have to steal important positions from the dominant class. I want to be published in a big publishing house because I want as many people as possible to see what I have to say. I remember when I published my first book, in different countries there were people who wanted to make adaptations of my books to the stage for theater, and every time they wanted to do it in the street or in another factory, in an ancient factory or in an ancient school, and they came from different countries, they didn't know each other, but all of them had the same idea, you know? And I said, no, I want the working class to be in the legitimate places, you know? I want to steal it from the bourgeoisie. I want the bourgeoisie who will go to this theater to be forced to see what I have to say. So I truly believe that it's a good thing if Toni Morrison is being published by the biggest publishing house, if Simone de Beauvoir was the same thing, Pierre Bourdieu was at the Collège de France, Michel Foucault was at the Collège de France. I think we have to impose ourselves in the places of power where we are visible and when we can actually make a change. And so yes, that's what I'm trying to do. And regarding Assa Traoré, so Assa Traoré, she created the Comité Adama, which is a French committee, political group, who fight against police violence that kills black people and Arabs in France. Her brother was killed by the gendarme, by the police forces, by gendarme and police. There are two different kind of things in France. But anyway, they were killed. Her brother was killed, and after that, for nothing, and just because he was black. And after that, she created this Comité Adama, and Geoffroy de la Galerie, who couldn't come, unfortunately, had to cancel, started to fight with them, and I understood that this committee was doing something like very important, something that I was trying to do at a completely different level in the literary field, which was to talk about urgent and necessary issues who were not addressed in the public sphere. And also, probably, it's the first time that there were some other groups who were fighting against racism and police violence, but as a gay person, I didn't feel necessarily welcome. And I felt welcome by the Comité Adama, because there were so many people who were, and I tell you because someone said it to Didier yesterday, someone was talking about it to Didier. There is for me a very dangerous homophobic mood in the left of people who talk about gay imperialism, or people who talk about pinkwashing, or people who talk about homonationalism, as if the problem today were the great gay rights, you know. The people who say that the gay marriage is for bourgeois, it's for the 1%, it's a struggle for the 1%. It is not, you know. I am a working class man. I was born in a working class, and the fact that I am able to marry someone that I love is something that affects me. And I felt I feel in the left a very violent mood against gay people, saying, oh, there are more and more gay people, more and more rights for gay people, and more and more poverty. But we should say the opposite. We should say the gay movement was so strong that it imposed this right. We should get inspired by what the gay LGBT movement did in order to get it right in other spheres. And it's not as if it's the fault, it's because of the gay movement, of the LGBT movement, that people are still poor. No, it has nothing to do. And the Comité Adama was one of the very first, very strong contemporary movements who was not using this rhetoric. But yes, that's what I have to say.
Well, I wish we had like 48 hours more. But thank you for coming. Thank you.